welcome to the Timeless Tales podcast.
Great to be here.
Okay, so today we're doing a deep dive into something, well, really quite special. It's source material shared by one of you, our listeners.
Yeah, and it's a personal account of World War II. But the frame is what makes it so unique.
Right. It's about revisiting those same battlefields decades later, specifically June 2004, the 60th anniversary of D-Day.
Exactly. The source is actually excerpts from a piece contributed to the BBC's WWII People's War Archive.
Okay.
It's called D-Day and Beyond with the Scottish Artillery Regiment, and it was shared by Tony Turnbull. It details his campaign, from D-Day, June 6, 1944, right up to late February 45.
But it's woven together with his return trip, isn't it, 2004, with his family?
That's the core of it. And they didn't just visit the WWII sites, they also went to some World War I locations that his regiment had connections to.
And the structure of that 2004 trip is really interesting. They actually did it in reverse.
Yeah, starting where his war ended and then traveling backwards, finishing up in Normandy for the anniversary. Quite a powerful way to structure it.
Definitely. So our mission here is to kind of trace this journey through time, through memory.
We want to pull out those key moments from his wartime experience, sure, but also really get a feel for that contrast he talks about.
The contrast between the war itself and then seeing those places peaceful 60 years on.
Exactly. And look at how these landscapes just hold layers and layers of history. We'll try and extract the most, impactful bits for you.
Okay, let's jump in then. And the 2004 trip will start at the end of his war story.
Right. The very first place they visited on that return trip was the exact spot of his last action, February 27, 1945.
And this was on a road between Udem and Wies in Germany.
Yeah, and right away he notes this stark contrast, the old road where the fighting happened. It's just a quiet lay-by now next to a newer road.
But the forest path nearby looked the same.
Pretty much the same, he says. And you just try to imagine standing there in 2004. It's quiet, maybe just mosquitoes buzzing around.
And flashing back to that day in 45, what happened?
Well, he describes the infantry moving along a ditch beside the road. He had this feeling, this instinct that it wasn't safe. So he moved away just a few yards near some trees.
A life-saving move, it turns out.
Absolutely. Because suddenly shells started bursting everywhere, machine gun fire opened up.
And the source is pretty blunt about what happened next.
Extremely. The men who stayed in the ditch, the whole group was wiped out. He took cover behind a fallen tree but got hit. Shell splinters in his leg, his shoulders, couldn't move.
Immobilized. And he mentions the people he was with.
Yeah, his officer, his observation post assistant, the OPAC, he says they made themselves scarce, his words.
Wow. So he was left there.
Essentially, yes. But incredibly luckily, there was a stretcher party nearby. They found him, rescued him.
And that was it. That was the end of his war.
That was it. He thought it might just be a short evacuation, 48 hours maybe. But no, that rescue was the end.
Where did he end up?
Quick stop in Nijmegen, then flown from Eindhoven to Bruges, stayed in a hospital set up in a nunnery.
A nunnery?
Yeah. Then flown to Swindon in England and spent 2 months recovering in Leicester. The war actually ended while he was back home in Scotland.
Incredible story of survival.
Yep.
And then in 2004, from that exact spot.
From that spot where he was wounded, they drove straight to the Reichswald Forest War Cemetery.
And that must have been quite something.
You really feel the weight of it in his writing. He describes the cemetery as beautiful, peaceful, especially on this glorious evening they visited. Thousands of headstones.
Thousands.
And among them, he found the graves of the 2 South Lancashire Company commanders he'd been with on that very day, February 27.
The ones killed in the action where he was wounded.
Exactly. Seeing their graves right there on land given by Germany after just being at the place they fell. It must have been incredibly profound, maybe difficult too.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Okay, so geographically,
Right.
The 2004 trip then moved on.
Yes, they passed through Rhine in Holland. He notes the change. It was a large village back in 44-45. Now it's a thriving town.
And he was based there during the war.
For a time, yes. December 1944, staying in another evacuated nunnery overlooking the River Maas.
Doing what?
His job then was spotting the vapor trails of V-2 rockets being fired from the German side and reporting their bearings. High-tech stuff for the time, relatively speaking.
And he shares a couple of really vivid memories from WWII.
2 very striking ones, almost surreal. The first was on Christmas Day afternoon.
Okay.
Watching an American B-52 crew bail out over their side of the river, but then seeing the wind catch their parachutes.
Oh, no.
And just blow them slowly, inevitably back towards the German lines. Tragic.
God, that's bleak. And the second memory.
This one's different. Christmas Eve, midnight. The Germans in their trenches across the river suddenly started firing colored tracer rounds up into the air.
Tracer round. That's fireworks.
Exactly. He called it a splendid firework display that lasted several minutes. A strange, shared moment of light amidst all the darkness. It makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does. Those little moments of shared humanity, even across enemy lines.
And also, while in Holland in 2004, they visited the museum at Overloon, site of really fierce fighting in late 44.
And he found something personal there.
Yes, quite remarkable. A 25-pounder field gun, the standard British artillery piece, but it was from his own regiment.
No way. On display.
Right there in the museum, seeing this piece of equipment, something he would have worked with, something part of all that destruction, now preserved. Yeah, that must have hit home.
Definitely a powerful moment of connection. So, from Holland, where did the 2004 trip take them?
Westward into Belgium and Flanders, and this is where they started deliberately visiting sites from the Great War, from World War I.
Okay, because his regiment had passed through there during WWII.
They had, back in September 1944, but he mentions it was just in the darkness of one night. They didn't see anything, really. The 2004 trip was a chance to actually see these places.
And where did they go? Ypres must have been on the list.
Absolutely. Ypres, and specifically the Meningate, he calls it a wonderful monument. It lists something like 60,000 soldiers from that area in WWI who have no known grave. Just staggering numbers.
There's a ceremony there.
The last post-ceremony. They witnessed it, held every evening at 8 p.m., and the account stresses the continuity.
It's held every single night.
Every night since it was built, apparently. The only interruption was during the German occupation in World War II. Think about that daily act of remembrance for decades. It's incredibly powerful.
Truly is. And after Ypres?
The next day, they toured the Somme battlefields in France. He lists some of the landmarks they visited: the Piper's Memorial,
Okay.
the South African Memorial at Delville Wood, the Cross of Remembrance, and of course the huge Lochnair crater at La Boisselle.
That massive mine crater from the first day of the Somme?
Exactly. July 1st, 1916. He also mentions seeing a small cemetery nearby, just 99 Gordon Highlanders buried there, caught by machine guns attacking Mamet's village.
It's those specific, smaller stories within the vastness that really bring it home.
They do, and there's this anecdote from the Ulster Tower area, really brings the past into the present, quite literally.
Oh, wow.
His grandson was doing a bit of bullet hunting, looking for battlefield relics in a field.
Right, kids do that.
And his uncle spotted this curved piece of metal. Turned out it was a complete hand grenade, unpinned, detonator intact. Still live after all those years.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah. Excellent condition, apparently. A very stark reminder that the danger is still physically there, buried in the soil. They left it well alone, obviously.
I should hope so. A real lesson learned there.
Definitely. He also mentions seeing a plaque nearby listing 9 Victoria Cross winners from Irish regiments in WWI.
So much concentrated history. What else on the Somme?
They went to Beaumont Hamel, saw the Caribou Memorial for the Newfoundland Regiment, suffered appalling casualties, as he puts it, on that first day of the Somme, mentions one spot where apparently only one man survived the attack.
Just devastating.
And you can still see preserved trenches there, both Allied and German, plus memorials for the 51st Highland Division, other Highland regiments too. He notes how well-kept their cemeteries are, lovingly cared for, he says.
That balance between the scars and the remembrance seems key.
It really does. Then they visited Vimy Ridge.
A hugely significant site for Canadians.
Now a Canadian national park. There's this enormous, very stately shrine listing thousands of Canadian names, and he actually found 4 Turnbulls listed there.
A personal connection again, unexpectedly.
Yeah. And he briefly mentions they took a detour to see a WWII memorial, too, for the 51st Highland Division, above St. Valery.
Where they surrendered in 1940.
That's right, after Dunkirk. So another layer, connecting back to his own war, but an earlier, darker chapter for that division.
So how did he connect all these WWI visits back to his own wartime journey?
He reflects on how his regiment drove through all these places, the Somme, Flanders in September 44, at night, on their way from Les Andelys towards Mons in Belgium.
In the dark.
Exactly. He says they passed through as if they had never been. The history was just darkness outside the truck. So the 2004 trip, in daylight, with purpose, let him finally see the weight of that history they'd unknowingly traversed.
That's a powerful image, passing through history without seeing it.
It is, and that brings the 2004 journey full circle in a way. They eventually traveled back towards Normandy, reversing his wartime path.
And to get back where that night drive through the WWI battlefields began.
Precisely, back at Les Andelys. And from there, they revisited the area near Beeville-Beauville. This is where he spent several weeks right after D-Day, starting mid-June 1944.
Right, in the thick of the Normandy campaign. He mentions 2 chateaux.
Yes. He calls one the German chateau. It had been heavily fought over. Captured by the Suffolk Regiment on June 28, 1944.
At great cost, apparently.
He cites 165 casualties, called the bloodiest square mile in Normandy. But in 2004, completely rebuilt, tennis courts, trees recovered, lovely grounds, he says, but containing grisly contents underneath. His words again. They met the family living there now, descendants who were very welcoming, but that idea of the beautiful present literally built over the terrible past.
It says so much about how places hold on to history, visibly or not.
Absolutely. And the other chateau, Le Londel, the British one, that was his home for about 6 weeks in 44.
What was that like in 2004?
It was being renovated. He noticed shell splinter marks on the main house walls had been covered up, but you could still see them on the stables, little scars remaining.
Reminders of the bombardment.
Constant bombardment, yes. And the cellar he'd used during the war had been filled in.
But he met the family there, too.
Yes, the Bruant family, who farmed the land. This sounds like a real highlight of the trip for him. A glorious day, he calls it. Incredible kindness, hospitality.
And there's a special gift.
A very special gift. M. Bruant's father had made Calvados the apple brandy on that farm 40 years before, and they gave him a bottle from that original batch.
Wow, 40-year-old Calvados made right there where he lived during the war.
He describes it simply as special, a real connection across time tied to the land itself.
Amazing. So, getting closer to the actual D-Day anniversary dates in 2004.
Right. On June 5th, they were near Pegasus Bridge and watched a parachute drop. A fitting sight.
But the Pegasus Bridge area itself on the 6th, he wasn't impressed.
No, quite the opposite. He found it disappointing. Describes it as being turned into a fun fair. Noisy, smelling of fast food.
Not exactly solemn remembrance.
Not at all. He felt it lacked dignity, lacked reverence. Calls it a travesty, actually, though he does admit the new bridge looked good in photos.
Well, there's that. What about the beaches, Hermanville?
They spent time there on June 5th. It was warm, sunny, lots of holiday makers, but also houses decorated everywhere with flags, French, British, Canadian, American.
Sense of occasion?
Definitely. And he notes how kind the local people were. Someone even took photos for them. Then on June 6th itself, in Hermanville, it was understandably very busy.
Traffic must have been intense.
He mentions heavy traffic, yeah.
Yeah.
But he was really impressed with the gendarmes, the French police. Very polite, helpful, even gave them a pass to get closer to the beach area for the events.
And they attended some official ceremonies?
Yes. One was the unveiling of a plaque for the East Yorkshire Regiment. He actually includes the full text in his account.
Can you share some of it?
It starts to the everlasting memory. It lists the battalions involved, the beaches they landed on, the date, the cost in lives, and ends with this incredibly powerful line. Each risked all in freedom's cause.
Wow. Simple and profound.
Very. And nearby, there was already a plinth for the South Lancashire Regiment. Its inscription notes they liberated Hermanville on June 6, 1944, and it's dedicated to the 288 officers and men who died on D-Day and in the campaign that followed.
He calls these timely reminders.
Yes. Reminders of the real human cost behind the liberation everyone was celebrating.
Did they visit the war cemetery in Hermanville?
They did. The Hermanville War Cemetery holds casualties from the landings on Sword Beach and the fighting nearby. He describes it, like Reichswald, as beautiful and peaceful.
And the impact of seeing the graves.
He says seeing all those headstones, thousands, again, really brought home the simple, stark fact that people he knew, people who were there with him, just did not come home.
It personalizes the scale of the loss.
Exactly. A moving service was held there, and he mentions the village children placing flowers on the graves. A nice touch of local remembrance and ongoing gratitude.
Yeah, that's lovely. He also mentions another cemetery visit earlier.
Briefly, yes. The British Cemetery at Ranville, near Pegasus Bridge. He saw the grave of a Major Peter Beecroft there, who was killed by an artillery barrage when the contributor was nearby during the war. Another personal connection found.
It seems these cemetery visits were central to the emotional weight of the trip.
Absolutely. The ceremonies finished with a reception where veterans were presented with D-Day commemorative badges, a final bit of official recognition.
So looking back at the whole 2004 trip, what was his overall feeling?
Overwhelmingly positive, it seems. He mentions the glorious weather throughout, the incredible friendliness of the French people everywhere they went.
And their gratitude.
He highlights that specifically. He calls their genuine gratitude the most touching aspect of the whole experience. And also, just the sheer difficulty of reconciling the peace and beauty of the present day with the terrible memories of war associated with those exact same places.
That contrast again. Peace versus the memory of intense violence, 60 years apart.
It's the recurring theme. Experiencing the present landscape peaceful, welcoming, thankful against the backdrop of those personal, visceral memories of being under fire there. It was clearly profound.
Okay, so summing up this deep dive into Tony Turnbull's account, what are the key takeaways for us, for you listening?
Well, we've really followed a remarkable journey, haven't we? Through a veteran's personal WWII history from his last fight back to the D-Day beaches, but also touching on that deeper layer of WWII history he passed through.
And all seen through that unique lens of the 60th anniversary revisit.
Right. We've seen how deeply personal history gets tied to physical places, how landscapes carry these echoes, these layers visible and hidden of conflict, sacrifice, remembrance.
And maybe most powerfully, that stark, enduring difference between wartime chaos and peacetime life.
This account gives such a powerful personal view on it all. Through his eyes, his memories, you feel the human cost etched into the land, but also the resilience, the return of life.
It's definitely a reminder, isn't it, that the peace we often take for granted today was built on incredible sacrifice. And that history, that past, it's often right there, just beneath the surface.
It really is. And he ends his account with a reflection that, well, it really stays with you.
What does he say?
He writes about how those awful days of death, destruction, dismay have now been replaced by days of life, love, and laughter. He mentions returning home in 2004 and thanking God for that fundamental shift.
Life, love, and laughter replacing death, destruction, and dismay.
Yeah. And it leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty big question to think about, doesn't it?
Which is?
Knowing that our peace, our ability to enjoy those days of life, love, and laughter, rests on that foundation of immense cost and sacrifice. What does it truly mean to make the most of it? How do we carry the weight of that past responsibly into our present and future?
Something to definitely think about.